Sometimes, the loudest thing in a room is the way people refuse to look at you. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight back. But somehow, that made them more afraid. Maybe it was the way she stood too still, too composed. Maybe it was her silence that unsettled them more than any scream ever could. They said she was difficult. They called her intimidating, all because she asked for respect and didn't apologize for standing where she stood. But what happens when a woman who's done nothing wrong becomes the center of a story she didn't write in a town that had already made up its mind? This is the story of Dr. Evelyn Hart, and it begins with 15 seconds of silence no one could unsee. The morning air in Helena was thin and dry, colder than usual for late October. The courthouse stood like an aging sentinel in the middle of Main Streeted brick, 3 stories, the flag barely moving above it, as if even the wind had learned not to speak too loudly in this town. Dr. Evelyn Hart walked up the courthouse steps with her hands buried in the pockets of a beige trench coat that had weathered more seasons than it should have. Her shoulders were pulled in slightly, not from the cold, but from the invisible weight pressing down on her ribs. She didn't look back. She hadn't, not since the video surfaced. In the 15-second clip that ricocheted through Helena's group chats and local Facebook pages, Evelyn could be seen stepping forward toward a student with her hand slightly raised. Then the footage cut to black. No context, no sound, just the frame of a black woman standing in a hallway filled with white teenagers and a single boy yelling, "Get your hands off me!" just before the clip ended. The local news ran the headline for 3 nights. Teacher accused of aggression toward student, school investigating. It didn't matter that Evelyn had a spotless record. It didn't matter that she held a PhD in education policy, or that she had moved to Helena for a quieter life after 2 decades of teaching in underfunded schools in Detroit. What mattered now was a story they had already started telling before she even opened her mouth. Inside the courthouse, the hallway smelled of pine cleaner and fear. Jason Bell, the court-appointed attorney barely past his bar certification, sat waiting near the courtroom doors. He looked up when he saw her coming, giving a quick, almost polite nod. "You look ready," he said. She didn't smile. "I look exactly how I feel, like someone walking into something that was already decided before I arrived." Jason didn't answer. He tapped his pen against his notepad, unsure if that was meant to be a warning or just a truth too raw to smooth over. They stepped into courtroom B, where the walls still held portraits of long-dead justices, all white, all solemn-eyed, all judging. The room was half full. Teachers from Helena High sat in a quiet cluster near the back, eyes darting but not meeting hers. A few parents were there too. Someone Evelyn didn't know was holding a yellow notepad, not a reporter, just a watcher. On the plaintiff's side, the young boy's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Colton Monroe, sat straight-backed, flanked by their attorney, a sharp-jawed man in his 50s, named Warren Gehring. He wore a deep blue suit and the relaxed confidence of someone who'd never had to explain his tone. Judge Lorraine Whitman entered without announcement. A woman in her 60s, she had the look of someone who had grown weary of explaining things more than once. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Evelyn for a beat too long before moving on. "All rise." They rose. They sat. And the trial began. Gehring started with a slow, controlled pace, building a story, not presenting facts. A boy, a teacher, a moment of fear. He said the word fear 3 times in his opening. Said Evelyn's name only once. Called her the adult in power the rest of the time. Jason whispered, "You don't have to react. Just breathe." But Evelyn wasn't reacting. She was disappearing slowly, subtly becoming exactly what they had already decided. The silent, intimidating figure in the frame. The first witness was the student, Brady Monroe, 15, varsity swim team, clean haircut. He looked nervous but rehearsed. When asked to describe what happened, he said Evelyn cornered him. Said she snatched the phone and raised her voice. Never mentioned the words he'd said to her, the ones Evelyn had tried to forget but couldn't. She said I had no right to record her. But I was just showing my friends how weird she is, Brady added, smirking slightly. The room didn't laugh. It just shifted just enough to remind Evelyn that power in this town didn't come from truth, but from who got to speak it. Jason leaned over. He's framing you as unstable. We'll push back. She didn't answer. Her fingers were clenched under the table, but her face was still, taught by experience, trained by survival. There were no tremors. Just stillness that read if you didn't know better us, apathy. By the time court recessed for lunch, Evelyn sat alone on the bench outside. The hallway had grown colder. Fluorescent lights buzzed above her. She opened her phone. There were messages, unread, from her sister in Atlanta. Don't say anything that makes it worse. From her former principal in Detroit. Praying for you. They don't know what they're doing. From no one in Helena. She leaned back against the wood paneling, eyes drifting toward the ceiling, and tried to remember why she ever believed Montana would be different. There was a time maybe 3 months ago when she stood in front of her classroom and talked about Baldwin and Morrison with students who had never read a black author. She remembered one girl in the front row saying, "I never thought about books like this before." That moment had felt like a start. Now, even the girl sat on the other side of the courtroom, near Brady, near safety. Jason returned with coffee and silence. He handed her the cup. She didn't drink it. "I don't know if this town wants to hear your side," he finally said. Evelyn's voice came out soft. "It's not that they don't want to hear. They don't even know they're not listening." That night, Evelyn stood barefoot in her kitchen, staring at the microwave like it had the answers she couldn't find anywhere else. The lasagna she'd brought home 3 days ago remained untouched. In the dim light, the silence pressed in, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settled in your bones like cold air no blanket could touch. Her apartment above the hardware store had no real view, just the back alley and a dumpster that sometimes groaned when the wind hit it just right. She didn't decorate much. A plant sat in the corner, wilted but still alive. A radio from the 80s on the counter played Coltrane low enough to feel more like a heartbeat than a melody. She used to fill rooms with words. Now, even her own voice felt foreign. Evelyn pulled out her worn leather journal and sat at the kitchen table. The pages had absorbed years of her life student moments, small victories, the bitterness of unspoken truths. She opened to a clean page and wrote slowly, deliberately, "It's not the silence that breaks me. It's what I hear inside it." Across town, Jason Bell sat at his desk, the recording of Brady's testimony playing softly from his laptop. He paused it midway through and closed the lid. He rubbed his face with both hands, then leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He didn't know what scared him more, that the jury might convict her based on a lie, or that they might convict her because they didn't need one. The next day in court, Evelyn entered just after sunrise. The gallery was more crowded now. News spread in Helena like wildfire doused in gasoline. A new face sat near the back, a woman in a beige cardigan, legal pad open, the unmistakable air of someone taking notes not for law but for publication, maybe a blog, maybe worse. Jason greeted Evelyn at the door. "We'll keep today short. Just character witnesses. Nothing aggressive." She nodded, buttoned her coat tighter, though it wasn't cold. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours. First up was Principal Shelley, called to the stand by the prosecution. "I wouldn't say Dr. Hart was aggressive," she began, "but she did have a tone, very direct. Some students said they felt uncomfortable." Jason objected. "Uncomfortable isn't a legal metric, Your Honor." The judge sustained it, but the word had already landed. Uncomfortable. It stuck to Evelyn like static, like something you can't see, but always feel. Next came Mrs. Claire Peterson, head of the PTA. She smiled gently as she spoke. "I believe Dr. Hart meant well, but in this community, you have to meet people where they are. I'm not saying she doesn't belong. I'm saying maybe we weren't ready." Evelyn didn't flinch, but inside her chest, something small curled in on itself. Jason leaned in. "We'll call someone from the community on our side tomorrow." "Who?" she asked. He hesitated. "Exactly. During lunch break, Evelyn sat alone in the empty courtroom. She didn't check her phone. There were no messages to read. The weight of silence wasn't always in the absence of noise, it was in the presence of people who refused to speak when it mattered. She walked out into the hallway and found herself face to face with Leah Monroe, the girl who used to sit in the front row, the one who asked thoughtful questions and once stayed after class to talk about Morrison. Leah looked at her, then down, then away. "I didn't say anything bad," she said quietly. Evelyn nodded, her voice steady. "I know." But what Evelyn didn't say and would later write in her journal was, "Silence isn't neutral. It leans." That evening, Jason called unexpectedly. His voice sounded different, uncertain, maybe even embarrassed. "There's something I think you should hear," he said. He drove over with a flash drive in hand. Evelyn met him at the door, still in the same sweater she'd worn to court. He stepped inside, like he didn't know whether he was entering a home or a battlefield. He plugged the drive into her laptop, clicked play. The footage was grainy, shot from someone's phone. There was no video, just audio, but it was enough. Brady's voice, "You can't tell me what to do, Black Lady." Evelyn's voice, calm, restrained, "I'm asking you to stop recording me." Brady again, "I'll post this, I swear to God." The rest was silence. Jason looked at her. Where did he learn to talk like that? Evelyn shook her head, then whispered, "From everywhere." Jason said, "This could change everything. I'll submit it first thing tomorrow." But Evelyn stood still, arms crossed, like the sound had frozen her in place. "What if they don't care?" she asked. He didn't have an answer. Later that night, she sat at the window with her journal and wrote, "When people are more offended by how I protect myself than by how I'm attacked, that's not justice. That's theater." The next morning in court, Jason submitted the audio recording as evidence. The prosecution objected, but Judge Whitman allowed it. The room shifted. Brady's parents stared straight ahead. One juror's hand paused above their notebook, uncertain what to write next. But it wasn't the courtroom silence that Evelyn noticed, it was the gallery. People shifting in their seats, leaning forward, listening for the first time not to words, but to something more dangerous. Truth. After court adjourned, Evelyn walked alone down Main Street. She passed the school she'd once taught in. The flag waved lazily above it. A few students crossed her path on the sidewalk. None greeted her. One pulled out a phone, lifted it, then hesitated, then lowered it. She walked on. At home, she pulled out the journal once more, hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from something heavier. The cost of composure. She wrote, "My silence was never weakness. It was strategy. It was survival. But silence can only hold the truth for so long before it breaks." And then, "Tomorrow I speak." The courtroom was quieter than usual the next morning. Not empty, just still, like something unspoken had shifted in the floorboards themselves. Jason stood at the defense table with a nervous twitch in his left hand, trying to look composed. He had never entered evidence before that could change the course of a trial. But today, he had the audio file cued and ready. He also had a trembling in his chest that felt dangerously close to hope. Judge Whitman adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable. "Proceed," she said simply. Jason clicked play. There were no images, just sound. Brady's voice crackled through the speakers, mocking, condescending, full of the casual cruelty teenagers carry like second skin. "You can't tell me what to do, Black Lady." Gasps fluttered through the courtroom, low and sharp. Evelyn's voice followed, soft, measured, exact. "I'm asking you to stop recording me. It's not respectful." Brady again, "I'll post this, I swear to God." Then silence. Not courtroom silence. The kind that follows a mirror breaking. Mrs. Monroe, Brady's mother, instinctively reached for her son's arm. Her husband shifted in his seat, the muscles in his jaw tightening as though bracing for a fall. Jason didn't look at the jury. He didn't need to. He could feel them leaning, physically and emotionally, toward the woman they had once dismissed as cold and confrontational. He turned to Judge Whitman. "No further comment, Your Honor." The judge only nodded. But the damager, the truth, was already done. After the session, Evelyn stepped outside the courthouse and sat alone on the stone bench by the steps. The wind was strong, sharp against her coat, but she didn't seem to notice. She sat still, hands clasped, eyes not on the street but somewhere much farther away. A voice came softly from beside her. "Dr. Hart?" She turned. It was Leah Monroth's student who once sat in her front row, now standing with arms crossed, as if afraid to be seen but too heavy with guilt to walk away. "I should have spoken sooner," Leah whispered. Evelyn studied her fastenat with judgment, but with quiet clarity. "Why didn't you?" she asked. Leah's lips trembled. "Because I didn't want to be the one who broke what was easy." Evelyn didn't nod. She didn't absolve. She simply looked forward again and said, "Truth usually isn't." That night, Evelyn returned home to find an envelope slid under her door. No name, no note, just a USB stick inside. She hesitated long enough to consider the risk, but plugged it in anyway. The screen flickered. It was surveillance footage, grainy, time-stamped clearly from the school hallway. Clearly, never released. This time, the clip didn't stop at Brady's performance. It continued. Brady, phone in hand, following Evelyn down the hall, mimicking her walk, mocking her tone, calling her names under his breath loud enough for others to hear. Then, the moment of confrontation. Evelyn turning, standing her ground, not shouting, not lunging, just firm. The words came again. "You can't tell me what to do, Black Lady." The video showed the hallway not filled with panic, but students giggling. It showed Evelyn reaching not to strike but to lower the phone. It showed what they'd cut out. Jason came over the next morning, and she played the footage for him in silence. When it ended, he turned to her and said nothing. Because what could be said? The truth had always been there. It just hadn't had a camera angle that served it. "We can submit this," he said. Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because I want them to see who I am, not just what they missed." Jason blinked. "You're still willing to stand there and speak?" She turned to him, calm and composed. "No, I'm willing to stand there and be seen." 3 days later, Jason called her to the stand. The courtroom leaned forward. Evelyn stood not with force, not with urgency, but with the kind of stillness that makes even movement feel like a statement. She wore navy slacks and a gray blouse. No makeup, no earrings, just herself. She adjusted the microphone slowly, deliberately, looked toward the jury, not pleading present. "My name is Evelyn Camille Hart," she began. "I am a teacher." She let the silence hold that word for a moment. "I moved to Helena to teach with the hope that my experience and my love for education would matter more than how unfamiliar my face might seem in this town." A pause. I was wrong. No gasps this time, just the sound of the jury breathing as one. On that day in the hallway, I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. I was being mocked, followed, called names I will not repeat in this room. And still, I did not yell. I did not touch. I asked. I asked for respect. Her voice did not waver. If that made people uncomfortable, then perhaps it's not my tone that's the problem. Perhaps it's the mirror my existence holds up. A ripple in the room. Leah Monroe closed her eyes. Principal Shelley shifted in her seat. Evelyn continued. "I've taught for 21 years. I've seen brilliance in children that most adults never bother to find. I've taught in cities where kids walk through gunfire just to get to class. And I've seen communities like this one where peace is protected not by fairness, but by silence." Her voice grew gentler now, not softer, deeper. "I am not here to demand apology. I'm here to remind this courtroom that being uncomfortable is not the same as being unsafe." She looked to Brady, who stared down at his shoes. Then to his parents, who now looked at her like people suddenly realizing their son was not the whole story. Then finally, to the jury. "You are not deciding whether I raised my voice. You are deciding whether I deserve to be heard at all." Silence. Not the kind that hides things. The kind that reveals. She sat down, Jason didn't say another word. He didn't need to. That night, the lights in Evelyn's apartment glowed warmer. For the first time in weeks, she opened the windows. The town hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She took out her journal and wrote. The truth didn't need to win. It just needed to stop being erased. She closed the book. Tomorrow, she would return to court. Not to defend herself, but to reclaim her name. By the fourth week of the trial, the courtroom no longer looked at Evelyn like a stranger. They didn't quite look at her like a neighbor either. But something had shifted, like a town seeing its own reflection after decades of looking only at others. The gallery was full now, not just with locals, but people who had driven in from other counties. Black parents, retired teachers, veterans in faded ball caps. A quiet congregation of those who had once been spoken over. The video had been submitted officially. It was entered into evidence 3 days ago, and no one, not even the prosecution, had found a way to deny what it showed. Brady's face had turned red the moment it was played. His attorney had offered a vague explanation about context, but no one wrote it down. Even the stenographer's fingers had paused for a beat too long. Now, the court moved toward closing arguments, but not before one final witness was called. Principal Shelley. Evelyn watched from the defense table as the woman she had once hoped to build a school year with took the stand. Her posture was perfect, her hands folded, her words careful. I never meant to imply Dr. Hart was dangerous, Shelley said, but I did feel she didn't understand our community. Jason rose. What do you mean by our community, Miss Shelley? Shelley shifted. We're a town that values harmony, quiet, predictability. Jason nodded slowly. And truth? Silence. Do you value truth, Miss Shelley? Yes, she said, her voice small. Jason returned to his seat. Then the judge did something unexpected. She turned to Evelyn. Dr. Hart, Judge Whitman said, her tone oddly warm, before we conclude, would you like to respond? The courtroom stilled. Evelyn rose. She didn't walk to the witness stand. She didn't need a platform. She stood where she was, and the room leaned in. Her eyes found Principal Shelley's. I applied for the position here, Evelyn said softly, because I believed schools shape the moral center of a town. Shelley blinked once, but held her gaze. I thought I was coming to teach children, but instead, I learned what silence can cost a person. She paused not for effect, but for breath, for control, for truth. When a child misbehaves, we ask, who raised them? But when a school misjudges a teacher, who raised the school? The words fell like snowfall, gentle, quiet, but each flake cold and unmistakable. Principal Shelley didn't speak. Her jaw twitched. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, but she did not answer. Because there was no answer that could match the clarity of what had just been said. A few jurors lowered their heads. Not in shame yet, but in reflection. And sometimes, reflection is the first form of reckoning. Jason didn't look at Evelyn. He looked at the floor. Because that was the kind of line that didn't need an audience. It needed memory. Outside the courthouse that afternoon, someone had chalked words on the sidewalk. Being calm while black is not a crime. It would be power washed the next morning. But not before it was photographed by half the town. That evening, Evelyn didn't journal. She sat in the living room with the lights off and Coltrane playing low from her old radio, her eyes closed, her breathing even. For the first time since her name appeared in a headline, she didn't feel like she was holding herself together with invisible thread. She was still bruised, but no longer invisible. The phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message. From an unknown number. Only 3 words. You were right. She didn't reply. Some truths don't need conversation. They just need to be heard. It had been 6 months since the verdict. The trial ended quietly. No fireworks, no front-page redemption. The jury delivered their verdict in a solemn tone, not guilty. No one clapped. But in the silence that followed, there was weight. Not celebration, recognition. Evelyn never returned to Helena High. There were murmurs that the school board had offered her a settlement. Others said She refused on principle. The truth was simpler. She was done asking to be understood. She chose instead to be useful. 3 months after the verdict, a small flyer began appearing on corkboards around town and in nearby counties. After school reading circle, Tuesdays, Thursdays, for students suspended, overlooked, or just quiet. Led by Dr. Evelyn Hart. There was no logo, no sponsors, just a folding table, a set of mismatched chairs in a public library's back room, and a stack of books Evelyn brought from Detroit in 2 heavy crates. At first, only 2 kids came, then 5, then 10. The kids didn't come because she was famous. They came because no one else listened to them like she did. She never lectured. She asked questions and waited sometimes minutes until the quietest among them chose to answer. And when they did, she nodded not to validate, but to make space. One Thursday in April, a young journalist from the Bozeman Tribune visited the circle. He had grown up in Helena and remembered hearing Evelyn's name in the whispers that followed her trial. He stayed for the entire session. At the end, as the children packed up and filtered out into the dusk, he approached Evelyn at the whiteboard. "Can I ask you something off the record?" he said. She nodded. "If you had one sentence, just one thing you could say to the people who misunderstood you, judged you, dismissed you, what would it be?" She didn't answer right away. She erased the board slowly, the marker squeaking once near the corner. Then she turned and looked at him, not harshly, not kindly, but as though she were looking through him into something older than both of them. Her voice was soft, but it didn't ask for permission. "I'd ask if they'd feel safe, standing still in a room full of people waiting to call them angry." He didn't write it down. He couldn't. Not yet. Some sentences are too heavy to carry until they've been lived with. That line never appeared in his article. But it appeared in his life. He told it to his editor, to his sister, to his mother, and slowly it grew. Not viral, not famous, just passed along, like a quiet truth finally getting its turn to travel. 1 year later, the Reading Circle had moved to a new space, bigger, warmer, donated by a local bookstore owner who had once signed a petition to have Evelyn removed from the school. Now she stocked the shelves herself. Evelyn never spoke about the trial again. But one evening, as a teenage boy read aloud from Baldwin and stumbled on a line, she smiled and said, "You don't have to say it perfect, just say it true." Because that's all she had ever done. Not shout, not plead, just say it true. Have you ever stood in a room where you weren't seen for who you truly are, just for what people feared you might be? If so, you're not alone. Evelyn Hart's story is not just about justice in a courtroom, it's about dignity in silence and the strength it takes to speak truth without ever raising your voice. It's a reminder that even in the quietest corners, we still have the power to choose who we become when the world tries to name us something else. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your life or of something you've lived through yourself, share it, pass it on. Because sometimes, the people who need to hear these stories the most are sitting in silence too. And if you're finding hope, healing, or even a little courage here, make sure to subscribe and let us know what this story meant to you in the comments below. We read every word. As Evelyn once said, "You don't have to say it perfect, just say it true." We'll be back with another story soon that, just like this, might shift something inside you. Stay tuned.